because one of the unique propositions in terms of what epigenetics can do for patients is it's giving you more of a 3 to 6 month running average of these outcomes. It's not a random, unreliable point in time like most traditional laboratory values are. So it's a more comprehensive picture of one's health, and it can even detect unstable signals earlier. So if there was something that was off that wasn't detected by your traditional laboratory values, the epigenetic markers would be able to pick that up.
Yeah, and I had this done. So y'all sent me a test what do you want to be known for?
Mm. I just want to be known for being genuine and authentic. Nothing that has to do with business or some big discovery or anything. I would just want to be known as, yeah, being like pure to people in my real true self.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, if you were to think of a story.
This podcast is produced by Concierge Medicine Today, LLC. All rights reserved. Concierge Medicine Today, or CMT, was founded in 2007 and serves as the industry's trade publication and annual medical conference organizer. Please note, the information shared on this podcast and across all CMT platforms is intended for general informational purposes only and may contain errors or omissions. Nothing in this podcast nor across CMT platforms constitutes medical, financial, legal, nor professional advice, and CMT is not liable for any inaccuracies. CMT encourages listeners to conduct their own research and consult trusted advisors before taking any action based on the content presented. No mention, interview, or link should be considered an endorsement. This content is primarily intended for a healthcare audience and may not apply to all listeners. Thanks for tuning in.
Good morning or good evening, Docpreneur Nation. You're listening to Concierge Medicine Today's Docpreneur Leadership Podcast. And today we have a special guest, Hannah Wendt. She is the co-founder of TruDiagnostic. And you can go to TruDiagnostic.com. We'll put the links as well, and her bio talking about epigenetics in the show notes below. But Hannah, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Michael. I'm excited to be here.
So before we begin, we kind of get a background about how did you get involved in healthcare? Was it a family business, or what kind of drew your interest into this specific field? And what field is this of epigenetics that just like you found? That's nobody graduates high school or starts college and thinks, you know what, I want to do epigenetics in 4 years.
I don't even think I really knew what that meant until I was probably a junior in college. Not because I wasn't searching for it or looking for it, but just because we didn't educate about that in the traditional school system. So I know we were talking a little bit before we hopped on here, but I remember just always being interested in science growing up. Even as a little girl, I remember I would go out to our creek in our backyard and our pond and, get my hands dirty, flip over rocks, just really wanting to understand a little bit more about the ecosystem I was living in and how the world works. So I knew I wanted to head down some path like that. So I originally went to school on a pre-veterinary path in animal science, to the University of Kentucky, and was one of those people who was like, I'm never going to change my major. They say a ton of people end up doing it. I was very hard-headed at the time, ended up switching it pretty quickly. And was like, hey, I just want to keep my options open. So I'm going to go general undergraduate biology degree. Maybe I want to go to grad school in another area, or medical school. Veterinary school could still be on the table. And I took a couple interesting laboratory courses and did some really amazing bench work and higher level work with some cell signaling labs at the University of Kentucky. And found out that I didn't want to do bench work, but that I was really interested in the cell and how it works. And really that led me to want to be more involved in genetics, epigenetics, but also counseling about that. I knew I didn't want to be stuck in a lab, but I wanted to work with people and talk to people and have that touch point. So I thought genetic counseling would be of interest. Didn't end up doing that either, and took a interesting position right outside of school at a compounding pharmacy in Nicholasville, Kentucky, that really specialized in peptide products. They pioneered a lot of the peptides you see on the market today. That is when I was like, wow, because I was introduced into this world of medicine that was completely different than from what I grew up in. I'm from a small town north of Dayton, Ohio called Piqua, about 20,000 people. So small to me, maybe not small to others. But we just had a traditional healthcare system, right? Where you would go to the doctor and maybe get a physical if you were involved in sports, but it wasn't necessarily preventative care. So to circle back and answer your question, no family business. I really don't have any other scientists in my family. My sister's a nurse now, but really just a personal interest and exposure through a job I was lucky enough to have and find right outside of college.
Wow. Well, before we jump into kind of a few of the topics, and our primary talk today is going to revolve around the pace of aging as our number one health indicator, talking about epigenetic testing and the clinical utility of it for doctors, and really how the role of epigenetics is shaping physicians' practices and personal health strategies and conversations they're having with that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do, tell us about TruDiagnostic. And again, this is not a sponsorship. They're not sponsoring here. We just think that doctors need to be resourced and educated. And you're the co-founder of TruDiagnostic. So who is TruDiagnostic? What do you primarily do?
Yes, TruDiagnostic was being built at the end of 2019. We really came about in 2020 and ran our first epigenetic sample in July of 2020 with one goal in mind, which was to provide these type of healthcare providers in this integrative, functional, all cash pay medicine space, really information into how our body is aging. So we look at biological age because that is the number one risk score and risk factor for all-cause mortality and morbidity. Meaning if you look at all sorts of different outcomes, cancer, COVID-19, heart disease, heart risk. The number one risk factor for all of those you would think is maybe smoking, right? Or someone's alcohol consumption, or male versus female. It's actually age by a landslide. It's not even close. So we thought this was a very, very obvious piece that was missing from that concierge model, right? And these anti-aging physicians model, right? They're trying to extend lifespan and health span in their patients, but they're actually not quantifying it, right? And that was the problem that we were trying to solve for. So TruDiagnostic, I would say by definition, is a health data company that really specializes in epigenetic insights as it relates to one's health. Our headquarters are in Lexington, Kentucky, and we have a CLIA certified lab in which we process all samples through.
Wow. So let's jump into some of the unpack some of the rabbit trails here. And let's talk about, I'm trying to decide which one should be first. Let's just talk about extending quality of life through epigenetic testing. That's pretty broad, and then we'll narrow in as we move forward. So
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about your thoughts on extending the quality of life through epigenetic testing, what you've seen and experienced out there.
yeah. So extending quality of life, the first response that pops up into my mind is extending quality of life equals health span, right? And this is something I'm sure many listeners know about or hear about. And health span is how many healthy years can we have at the end of our lives, whereas lifespan is how long we're actually living. With the research that's out right now, I'm not sure that we can extend lifespan much more unless there's a massive breakthrough in science and technology in terms of finding some type of compound, whether it be supplemental or probably more pharmaceutical-based compound that can really, really extend life, right? So we're looking at a cap for humans as a species at probably 125 right now. But is it
Wow.
really worth living to 125 if those years are bedridden, right?
Yeah.
Even close your eyes right now and think about when you're sick, right? And you're just not feeling great. It's awful. I know I don't
Yeah.
like to be sick, right? You're fatigued, you're tired, you really don't even want to eat, drink, socialize. You just kind of want to sleep. So are we comfortable with that same type of positioning at the end of our lives, but for years on out? And I would say that most people would probably answer no. So how are we able to actually extend that health span? Well, it comes back to being able to measure that, right? We can't really manage what we're not measuring. That famous quote by Peter Drucker. And measuring your biological age is going to be the most helpful in that state because it is that number one metric. It's like a tool you can use that defines where you're at, right? You don't have to involve all of these complicated laboratory values or hormones or genetic panels or gut microbiome testing or nutrition testing. All of those are great. But if you just want one metric that really rules them all, it's going to be that biological age factor. Because what we know, Michael, is if your biological age is older than your chronological age, or you have a faster speed of aging, as you mentioned, you are at increased risk for dying earlier. All right. And the same is true of the opposite. And that's why it's so powerful. If your biological age is younger or you're aging slower, you're going to be at a decreased risk for mortality, for death. And again, one reason epigenetics is becoming so much more clinically applicable is because it's in our hands now, right? We're able to change this through lifestyle factors, through supplements, medications, or procedural-based therapies too.
You know, I'm Canadian, so I'm probably the last guy on the planet to think that things like concierge medicine, having a more personal relationship with your doctor is intriguing. And I don't know if necessarily it's the future of healthcare because I just don't think that we're evolving as a culture in a healthcare marketplace like that, where, we can log. I mean, remember, you might, well, we all remember COVID and March happened and then June, July, and it's like all of these insurance companies turned things on telehealth wise that just was like, we've been wanting this for as patients for years. Like you couldn't have done this 20 years ago, but suddenly, the need was there. And I'll never forget one of our genetic professors said years ago, she said, Michael, not only is it going to take an act of Congress to change how we educate doctors, it's going to take an act of God. And then you think, that was before, she said that before COVID. And then it was like, wow, healthcare really changed a lot during that time. A lot of tests were on the market before that. And then you had more tests come in. And as patients, I always say I'm not a physician, but I am a patient. So I do know what it's like to sit on the other side of the exam room, the service window, or even sit on the other side of the aisle from all of these things in Target, that are telling me buy this test can help. And now there's all these things on the market. And so it is very confusing as a patient perspective to understand what's really going to help me.
Mhm.
And what has been the response from physicians and other providers out there in response to these types of tests?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. So I've been reflecting on this actually more recently because I've been in the space for some time now. It'll be 5 years here in a couple months in July since we ran our first sample, which is
Well,
still
congratulations.
crazy.
I mean, overnight successes are 10 years.
Yeah, so 5 years. I will say I still feel like it's a startup where,
Mhm.
we've been very scrappy at the beginning. Now we have over 100 employees and we're growing very rapidly. So I'm very thankful for everyone
Wow.
on the TruDiagnostic team. But when I think back, mind you, we have our own COVID story, right? We got started just around COVID. It was a very, very slow uptick. So it was a lot of cold calling. It was a lot of reaching out. It was a lot of education. Wait,
Mhm.
you mean genetics? Oh, you're testing
Mhm.
MTHFR and COMT genes? What do you mean by DNA methylation? Which I think we understood. We were breaking into a new science, right? This is something new we were bringing to the market. So it was a lot of education in the early days. And mind you, I want to make it clear too, Michael, we don't do any outbound sales right now. It's all inbound. We're currently growing and building a sales team,
Mhm.
but it's all inbound word of mouth. And then we go to a couple conferences throughout the year. As time has progressed, it's not it's not as much, I should say, about that education. It's about, hey, I've heard of this testing. My patient brought it to me. I know what epigenetics is. Tell me how to get started, right? What's the cost? What's the logistics? How can I make this a successful revenue generator in my business, right? So I've actually seen that transition with our clients through the years. And it's not always the case, but I would say that's the trend I'm starting to see. So I still think education is very, very hard. That's why I just love speaking with people on the topic and like having conversations with people like you today too.
Yeah, and as a medical conference organizer and doing CMEs and
Mhm.
being a part of that whole process, are you finding that the conversation and the presentations of epigenetics, the role of aging, is more becoming more common? I mean, we choose a lot of different types of content. It's a buffet of content. What are you finding out there that's getting the word out there so that doctors are like, I know about epigenetics, but I also find as an educator, in organizing these things is they're really good at what they know primarily at their wheelhouse of what they were taught in medical school. But then they get siloed, they get in an island all by themselves. And then, every now and then they'll read a few journal articles. They'll go to a conference, hear a couple of talks on whole genome sequencing, whatever it might be, the topic. Peptides, what's your thoughts on? I don't really have a
Yeah.
question. I have more of a thought.
No, that's a great. I'm following your thought process there. And I would say, yes, people are educating more on epigenetics, biological age, and what have you. I think we're starting to see that. But I think people are still educating on outdated versions of epigenetics and biological age, right? This field moves so quick. And I'm not even talking about the concierge field. I'm just talking about biological aging and epigenetics. If you throw concierge as a larger umbrella, that's moving even quicker, right? So it's so hard to get this information out there. So yes, we're seeing the broader topic be spoken about, but I think again, what's missing is, yes, I get it. These are really cool, useful tools. It's interesting, it's sexy, it's unique, but what do I do about it? Right? How do I use it? And I think that goes back to your thought process and point where you're like, hey, these clinicians are still stuck in their ways. Maybe they'll try a kit on themselves and say, that was cool. Right. And then
More
not
often than
add
not,
to
they
it.
do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's again, it's how can I use this in my practice? How can I create a program membership model? And I think what our testing does that's really nice, which I'll be interesting to hear about your approach because of that patient view. It acts, we've seen it increase patient retention because it's something tangible, right? It's something that makes sense that says, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to head in a really, bad direction. Or,
Mhm.
hey, good job. You're aging slower. Keep doing what you're doing, right? So it's a motivator. And I think that's why patients really like that. And if we can, again, start to offer these propositions to the providers, to the patients, and connect them all together, then I think we'll start to see the uptake in the use of this testing.
I don't want to say that I speak for every patient because I think every patient's very different, but I think from a general consumer, when the topic of something like this comes up in our conversation with my doctor in the
Mhm,
exam room, I am very open to it. I don't
mhm,
think that there's a lot of patients who wouldn't be open to learning more about their own health.
mhm,
And I was talking with a concierge doctor from the Northeast just yesterday or the day before, and I said, I'm not as a Canadian guy, who's lived here all his life and became a citizen. I also understand the the role of which a patient plays as being their own healthcare educator, advocate, almost in essence, like we're trying to make decisions because we can't have a relationship with our physician. We go to the urgent care and that's our doctor's office for the most part. And
yeah,
then I was talking to him and I said, it's interesting when we interview physicians who are from the Canadian system or any socialized, healthcare model, while I don't know, while there's pros and cons to everything, and there's pros and cons to things being super expensive here in the States because we're innovators, we're some of the best, right? So it makes sense that things cost more. However, if I can't get in to see my cardiologist or I can't get in to see this specialist until June 30th, well, it's the beginning of May. I'm going to make hopefully, some wise patients, a good person, a good human being who wants to stay healthy in their life would make some adjustments. They'd eat more broccoli. They would be more proactive. Now, not every patient is like that, but I think that these tests serve in a very important role. And I find from from a patient's perspective that being very open to these tests, I find that the doctor will get these tests and then, okay, yep, that's interesting. Couple of tweaks here and there, and then these tests are forgotten. And then it's my job as the patient to say, hey, I'm coming in 2 months. Um, what do you want to talk about? Like, there's a whole bunch I want to talk about. And he's like, well, I don't have time for that. And I was like, hey, well, I get it. But at the same time, maybe we just focus on one item that you're concerned about that came back as a response to this test. What's been the patient response, the physician struggle, or that tension that exists out there that's like, I just don't have time, but at the same time, I recognize the utility and the value of something like this.
The hard question. I think if your physician tells you they don't have time, you're seeing the wrong physician,
Hmm.
probably, which is blunt of me to say, but the first response that really came into my mind. I think your relationship with your healthcare provider outside of your immediate family, your spouse, your children, etc., is probably the most important.
Yeah.
It's fundamental that you have someone you trust and you have a really great relationship with them. And I know there's lots of questions around that, right? Should I be telling my doctor how much alcohol I consume, how much tobacco, other substances, right? Should I be very open with them? And you should be able to very much trust your healthcare provider, and you should be able to tell them everything and anything. And I know that can seem very, very scary, right? There could be a conversation where you can talk to them about how this information is being documented and the types of conversations you want to have with them. But that would be my answer, Michael. I think physicians who are in more of this concierge medicine role and really have these established programs in place, whether it be 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, they're going to have a specific patient cycle where they really should be the ones initiating care, whether it's through automated texts, automated emails, or a phone call, or whatever type of communication. But I think if you're having to chase your healthcare provider, it's probably not the correct one. It should be the other way around. And that goes more to the providers having that established care in place. And now I'm getting more into the business side of things, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah. Well, where do you see the future of this? Like, I see from a patient perspective, my kids who are one just turned 18 and she's about to graduate high school and move into college, and she got offered a 401k through her, her high school job. And she's like, I don't know what to sign up for. They give me 12 options. I was like, well, I'll do some research. And then she went on and did some research on AI. And she's
I,
like, okay. And then like had just clicked on the first couple Google links, and she's like, I already know which ones I want to delegate the 25% to. It's like,
yep.
because I can only choose four. I was like, wow, you make decisions so much differently, and faster. And so I think that there is a role where patients are going to say, I can't get in to see my doctor. Um, and they might not know about, cash only doctor's offices. They might think that a cash only clinic is an urgent care clinic. And in many ways, it kind of is. Retail healthcare clinics, for better or worse, regardless of how folks feel about them, they did show us the transparency that can be out there because they put on, just like McDonald's, and I know that kind of cheapens healthcare in such a way, but at the same time, patients and doctors both wanted transparency in healthcare. Well, now you got it, but now it's like a double-edged sword. Well, I don't know if I want to list all my prices out there, but
No.
that's what patients want. And so patients are saying, I like this type of stuff, but AI is going to be my doctor, kind of, until I get in to see these. So what role do you see? What do you see the future of epigenetics to be like? If you were to put your crystal ball in 5 years, you've already done 5 years. 5 years from now, where do you want it to be?
Yeah, so at TruDiagnostic, we love AI. We're very heavily ingrained within AI. We actually have about 1 day a week, it varies, where we'll do two groups and have a half a day. We call them AI Fridays, where everyone gets together and we're building tools and we're on the forefront and we're really encouraging all of our employees to use it. I don't think it's going to well, it may replace jobs in the future, of course, but it's, not to scare anyone. It's not to replace a physician. It is only there to supplement physicians. So actually, if you look at a lot of the studies where they look at doctor plans versus what the AI's given, if you actually use AI as a standalone, it's going to be better than that doctor in terms of care.
I've heard
Doctors,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and the studies are very well documented. They look great. Doctors are not meant to be databases. They're humans, all right?
Hmm.
Doctors are also not statisticians. They're not bioinformaticists. They're not encyclopedias, right? They're very, very knowledgeable, but that at the end of the day, we want doctors to be doctors, and what they went to school for is to take care of people. You know, I wonder how many doctors, or I actually, Michael, I wonder how you've had this experience. If you've actually had your doctor sit down, not whip out all of the lab values, not show you all of these statistics, and just say, Michael, how are you? How's your family?
Yeah.
How's your stress levels? Right? And I know I didn't answer your question directly, but so I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but I have my own kind of concierge physician that I see, and he did all the lab results, and that was really cool. I'm a science, I'm a nerd, I'm a geek. I was, looking at all of my correlations and longitudinal results. But he looked at me at the end and was like, Hannah, just how are you really doing? Like,
Yeah.
talk to me, and it's encouraging, right? That's people just want that connection. I think connection
Mhm.
is really the purpose of life at its core. So I think that's really, really important. Now, to answer your question, where's epigenetics in that crystal ball? I think epigenetics, this is a bold statement, Michael, will replace all traditional laboratory testing in the next 5 years. So
Wow.
your lab core, in a paper we published with Harvard, we actually show over about 65% of the epigenetic biomarkers, we call them, outpredict your traditional laboratory values in terms of all-cause mortality and morbidity. Fancy way of saying these markers are more predictive, right, in terms of disease and death. And then not
Can
only
you
that,
before I jump on that, I can see their line of thought. Can you send me that and we'll put it in or send me
yes,
the link and we'll link it in the show notes.
yes, absolutely, of course. And not only that, they're more reliable, so they're more precise, and then it's more accessible too. So it's just a finger prick blood spot card. It's going to be cheaper for the amount of data you're getting. And before people are like, wait, what did she say? Better than traditional laboratory values? Traditional lab testing has been around for a long time. It has never been questioned or challenged, right?
Hmm.
They're a CLIA certified lab too. Legally, they can have up to a 20% variance within their outcomes, which is why you see physicians taking multiple aliquots of different sample types and sending them to different labs. So at its core, epigenetics is just a biomarker, right? I think people overcomplicate it. We're looking at your gene expression levels. It's just a biomarker. And a point of a biomarker is to be able to predict the future. And we see these epigenetic markers doing that better than traditional lab testing today. So think of it for applications of everything, Michael, even chronic disease states in the future.
Do you find that there's any resistance among the medical community, physicians and otherwise, towards, these biomarkers and the clinical utility of it? Is it an older mindset of like, well, because we push this boulder up a mountain every day, and I would say 1 out of every 10 doctors are very into this. Like, tell me more. Like, I'll drop what I'm doing and go see it, go to a conference on this stuff. Whereas the rest are like, no, 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 no. Those are great ideas. Those are great tests. Those are all wonderful things, but that's not how we do it here. And we don't have time for that.
I love how you role played there. Absolutely. Yes, we have a lot of pushback. I would say I see it less than you probably do, just because physicians who are signing up know, I think, what they're signing up for in a way. So we see that resistance a little bit less, but oh, we absolutely still see it. Wait a second, better than traditional laboratory testing. Um, and I want to make it clear, this is not a replacement for traditional laboratory testing, not yet. But in the next 5 years, do I see that? Absolutely. It is there to complement, because one of the unique propositions in terms of what epigenetics can do for patients is it's giving you more of a 3 to 6 month running average of these outcomes. It's not a random, unreliable point in time like most traditional laboratory values are. So it's a more comprehensive picture of one's health, and it can even detect unstable signals earlier. So if there was something that was off that wasn't detected by your traditional laboratory values, the epigenetic markers would be able to pick that up.
Yeah, and I had this done. So y'all sent me a test and I took it. Again, this isn't sponsored, but y'all were gracious enough to send a test. And so I get two reports. I get one for the patient, one for the provider. And I think that they're both fantastic reports. Always the little bit of a shorter one, but the more comprehensive one for the provider, but a very summarized TruAge report for the patients. And I found, things in it that I circled. I was like, if you're aging above a 1.0, this is the risk statement for my tuned in pace of aging. And over 1.0 would increase the risk of death by 56% in 7 years. Like, that's fascinating to me. Now, what have you found is really super valuable, like right away? The doctors are like calling you, within a week and saying, I just did this on 5 of my patients. This stuff works. Like, this stuff is pretty intriguing. Here's what I find important. What are they finding, like the top 2 or 3 most important things that's really able to guide them in better decision making?
Yeah, I would say most of our providers' favorite from like a clinical standpoint, my personal favorite from like a research standpoint is that Dunedin pace marker. So the one that you mentioned right there.
Hmm.
As with any biomarker, they're going to have limitations. So the one thing that Dunedin pace does really well, though, is it tells you how quickly you're aging at this very moment in time. So think of it as a speedometer, right? It's this outcome between 0.6 and 1.4 that tells you how quickly you're aging. So if you're at 1, you're aging 1 biological year for every 1 chronological year. If you're at 0.8, you're aging 20% slower. If you're at 1.2, you're aging 20% faster. The goal is to be as low as possible and to keep it there as consistently as possible. So providers really, really like that because it tells you if you're going in the right direction or not. The limitation I was hinting at the beginning is it doesn't tell you the how or the why, right?
Mhm.
What's speeding up that aging or, slowing it down for that matter. And that's where we give you some other markers in the report, like the epigenetic biomarkers that can say, it's your inflammation levels or your metabolic markers, or you have high toxic load. So we expand on our report in other areas to tell you what to do about it and make it as actionable as possible. But again, for a lot of these patients who are very invested in their own health, they want to know what works for them. And that Dunedin pace is going to be able to tell them that. We do a ton
Wow.
of publications. We have over 50 epigenetic clinical trials that we publish and many more to come. And we can tell you what works on a populational level, right? But what really matters is what works for you. So if you want to take a baseline test, you get that pace, then you can implement something. You could test in as soon as 2 months even to see if that change was working or not. If you wanted to try some interesting longevity medication, rapamycin, metformin, maybe GLP-1s, or SGLT2 inhibitors, things like that, you could do so.
Wow. This is encouraging. I mean, it's almost like I wish I wasn't as old as I am, not according to my biological or, not according to the report, but like, because I'm younger than my actual age, according to the
Good.
report. But it's almost like I wish I could see my kids benefit from this. And I think that we will, and I will. However, like, their kids, my 18, 16, 11, they're going to have kids one day and they're going to be like, this is, yeah, like they're just going to have more information to make more informed decisions, to be able to take back to their doctor. And whether the doctor or the medical provider or office is like, I don't want it, something that you brought from the internet, or because you can't get this from the internet, it's only from the doctor's offices, right? So how do you work with doctor's offices?
So we do sell it online too, if you just went to our website, but it's going to be at a much higher cost to just the general consumer, and they're not going to get all of the reporting that the physician's going to get. So our main audience is healthcare providers really, they can just go to TruDiagnostic.com. There's a tab that says for providers, or I think it's even /providers, where they can just sign up for an account and get started. They get a couple of discounted kits to run on themselves, or friends, family, or first patient. We go through and prompt them to take an onboarding call, which would be with myself or someone from our team. And then we like to get them through the process. There's nothing better, Michael, than that hands-on experience. You could probably imagine that. And once they get their results back, we actually connect them with our board certified geneticist. Her name's Melissa. She's amazing. And she'll actually review the results with the provider and make it as clinically applicable for them, train them up on it. And then we have a ton of videos, resources that they can use. I forgot to mention when you asked for, other maybe educational resources in this space, what we're actually seeing. There's a CME course called the Clinical Epigenetic Society. I believe that's the name. We helped them and referred speakers over to them for a course that they created. And I've heard some really great feedback so far. So it's really meant to ingrain epigenetics in the clinical setting. And that's a place that people can go and get CME credits for too.
Wow. Well, I think that the future is moving in this direction. And I know, as we just talked about, there's always going to be resistance to innovation, which kind of, especially in healthcare, which is like the roughest part of healthcare. I mean, besides what physicians have to go through, but from wrenching on the healthcare models out there each and every day, as you and I do in our own unique spaces and places, it's discouraging that healthcare is so slow to adapt. It's so slow to explore new ideas. And I'm grateful for organizations like you and others that, are saying, look, it's a big, hairy goal that could be realistic that we could replace, lab testing in 5, 10 years. Um, there will be pushback, obviously, probably more than we believe that there would be at this point. But, I am encouraged from the perspective of these tools are going to make the doctor's life a little bit easier. It's not going to be a save all for everything, right? But I think that they give us a lot, they give the patient a lot more options. And, I don't know who said it, but maybe it was my dad or somebody else, and he heard it from somebody, but it was like, money can't buy you happiness. Money buys you options. And I think that we all, as patients, we need a lot more options because we do feel very limited. And like we were talking about earlier, besides my wife and kids, for example, my physician is probably one of the top 5 most influential voices in my life. Like 5 words from them can discourage me. And I got the comment in the office, and it's awkward. And I don't think that patients are prepared for that awkward moment of like, how are things? Like, how's your stress? And you're like, dude, like, back off. I'm not ready to get personal yet.
Yeah.
Just,
Or when,
just
oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Or I was going to say, even when you ask someone, how are you, right? It's a question in passing that's more of a greeting sometimes. I was giving blood yesterday, just to give it for the greater good, and was speaking with the phlebotomist, and she was like, "How are you?" And I just like paused, which I normally don't do. I don't know why I did it this time. I paused and I was like, "Yeah, pretty good. It was a good day." And she was the one who was actually like, wait, I like that you paused there. Like it made it more authentic. You thought about it, right? So I think actually doing more of that conscious work with ourselves and checking in and saying, doing a full body scan and opening that conversation with our physician is the way that will change it too, because it's hard. It's not, normal, right?
Yeah. I, this is more of a statement, and I want you to riff on it a little bit, and then we're going to move into our lightning round of couple of questions that we ask everybody. So think about your last book that you read, or favorite book, or your book that you give away most to doctors. And you're like, I wish they would read this. Like, I wish more folks in healthcare would read this. But before we jump onto that, one of the thoughts is there's so much thought about in the healthcare community of, well, you know what? Those are great ideas. These are great innovations. These are great tests. This is great data. Um, but I just don't have time for that. Or, you know what? I'd rather criticize than, because it interrupts my money, it interrupts my revenue stream. And that's from healthcare executives, it's from administrators, it's from maybe insurance companies, all this resistance in healthcare. Maybe it's even from doctors where they would rather cross their arms and criticize, be like, well, primary care, family medicine, we're the center of the universe, and we should be that for patients. And
Mhm.
while there's some truth to that altruistic perspective, I also think that how's that been working? Like it hasn't really been working
Yeah.
all that well. And if you want to be fair, how did that work? How's that working for you? Like, how's
Yeah.
that working for you? Like, that's the awkward conversation I have with
Yeah.
doctors are like, okay, so you talk a big game about fairness, but how's that working for you? Like,
Yeah.
really? And then
I love it.
and then there's a pause, right? And there's like, you're right, it hasn't really been working for me. But, I think that if you want to continue thinking that way as a physician, as a healthcare provider, if you wrench it on the healthcare model in some form, if you're listening, and you just want to keep that status quo, then you get in line with the rest of the world to complain. And you can go get your permission slip. And I'm sure if we heard your story, it'd be like, sure, you get a hall pass to complain, But then there's a few, the one, maybe two, if we're being very conservative or optimistic, or optimistic, that one or two out of every 10 physicians are like, I want to lean into this stuff because my patients are bringing this stuff, and I think that there's some real clinical utility here. So you're
Yeah.
welcome to share your thoughts on that before we jump into our couple questions.
I think those who are not willing to change in every area of life or aspect of life are going to be the ones that are left behind. I think I'm just seeing a huge paradigm shift though in the entire medical space in general, right? And in healthcare. Um, my question would be it's super dependent on the person, right? So you go and you ask an ER doc, right? What's your quality of life? Most of them probably not great. I'm sure a lot of ER docs, if you approach them with this new model, you gave them everything on a silver platter, said, here's the type of life you could have, more time back, time well spent, an increase in terms of your quality of relationships with, people you love, then they'll probably think it's a no-brainer, right? But they need to be taught that. A lot of people don't actually know that's out there. So if someone is willing to at least be open and have that open mindset, then I really don't see how there's an alternative. But those
Yeah.
people who are closed off, I think they'll again, not to be too blunt, will probably get left behind in one way or another. But there are some really great groups out there who do a great job about educating on how to do this because it's not the traditional path, right? And that's what becomes hard. It's uncomfortable. So I think we need to start to see more of this. And that's what we do actually a lot at TruDiagnostic is we help providers who are more in the GP practice starting to expand it. I actually know how I know several healthcare providers who still run an insurance-based practice, but for functional and integrative medicine that gets reimbursed by insurance. There are ways to do it. And yeah, happy to speak on that more if anyone's interested. That's another rabbit hole we could go down, but there are ways to do it from an insurance-based model too, but where you're working a normal schedule and still enjoying your life. So I think that's what it comes down to is what people value and what they actually want.
Well, we're moving into our lightning round of questions, and we're speaking with the co-founder, Hannah Wint of TruDiagnostic. You can go to trudiagnostic.com to learn more. We'll put the links on how to connect with her and her team in the show notes below, as well as to a couple of studies or journal publications that they've put out so that you can unpack the data for yourself. So first question that if I'm a physician listening, how do I try it on myself? What's the next couple of steps I should be taking if I'm just in an exploratory mode?
Yes, absolutely. So just go to truediagnostic.com. You can see our little tab that is let me see what it says actually. It says partner with us, and the first tab is healthcare providers. So again, it is just trudiagnostic.com/providers. Read on the website, take a look, and I encourage you just to create an account. That way we can send you more education behind what we do, who we are, how we can help you. We're open to any and all conversations and really just want to learn about you and your practice and how we can help. And then we can talk more about epigenetics and our products if that's something that you want to offer in the future too.
What has been the response of the doctors trying it on themselves or the providers trying it on themselves?
I would say, again, most accounts are going to try it on themselves first. So really good response in them wanting to do it. And then they're going to understand the process a lot more too. So of course we see accounts who are trying it on themselves, going through the process, setting up the calls. The higher the provider engagement, the more they're going to interact with us on the back end, meaning, increase in kit test, attendance in webinars. We partner with a lot of practitioners because we want to make them key opinion leaders in this space. So we'll do patient referrals and things like that, which I know people are interested in too.
Wow. So if I want to offer this to my patients, I need to create the account partner with us, and then I can just talk with somebody at your team who will kind of walk me through what it's like to be a partnered physician. Is that how that works? Is there a cost for that being a partner?
Absolutely. So it does not cost to be a partner or to sign up. And then you're not required to talk with us either. So I have some really high ordering volume accounts who have never spoken with us, but they just want to purchase kits. So as long as your account gets approved, you're good to go and you can start ordering. But we'd love to still talk to you and meet you, of course.
Wow. Well, I took the test and I did the blood prick, and then I thought, the things I do, for the things I do, right? And I'm sure you've done it too. And you're like, the things we do for our jobs to advance the
Yeah.
conversation. And so I'm so grateful for organizations like TruDiagnostic, an epigenetic company that is really giving doctors more options and more information that's actually clinically going to be of use to them and their patients, and a revenue stream potentially as well, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And again, we'd be willing to talk about that for you. How can we help you specifically make this work? And that's going to be unique to every person, every provider that we talk with.
So, trying to last couple of questions. Um, This one's a little bit more commentary, but I'll let you talk about the future role or what you've seen around peptides and those types of things. Like, there are physicians out there who are a little more on the cutting edge, right? And they're probably all in on True Diagnostic or all in on these types of things. And then if you're thinking as a physician or as a care provider, thinking, I just don't know if my patients want that. And there's probably some populations, some communities that are like, sure, that community is not interested in these types of things. But then there's also like, well, I don't know what you don't know. And I'm a patient, and I can tell you that I want my doctor to be learning new things. I don't want just a dyed in the wool, do this. We're gonna send you to LabCorp, Quest, whatever. We'll look at that and we'll just make another prescription afterwards, and see how things are going. Like I can do that every year. Like I've been doing that every year. It hasn't really been working, but I love the conversation where my doctor was like, if you keep going down this road, Mike, you're gonna be, this way. And so that conversation was influential. And I want to encourage more physicians to try out things like True Diagnostic, try out things. And again, this isn't sponsored, but I think that I took it. I think that there's so much value in here that I'm definitely going to be taking it to my doctor and reminding him consistently every couple of months, like, hey, can we talk about depression? Can we talk about the anxiety side of this report? And he might not want to, but we're the patient, like, right? Like we're the boss. We should be the boss. Now, we're not going to make those clinical decisions, but like we're the customer. And I think that when when physicians start seeing themselves like that, that is going to help so much. What's your thoughts on that about being more of a cutting edge provider, like using peptides? Like, though I want that type of doctor that's always learning.
Yeah, I think it again comes down to the physician, who they are, and what they really stand for. I think there's so much education out there nowadays that you can heavily educate yourself. There are a lot of physician groups just like CMT that are amazing that you can get involved in and really start to network and collaborate and talk to other providers in the space and learn what they're doing. So I think just really understanding your offering and the reasoning behind what you're offering is key. But if you want to be on cutting edge, I think it comes back to the science, right? Read the research papers, understand what you're giving your patients, and also disclose that information with your patients. Hey, this is really cutting edge. We've seen it in these use cases before. Most providers have done it on themselves. So if I'm role playing, right, I've done it on myself. This is what I found. These are the side effects I've had, whether you've had any or not. This is why or why I would not recommend it for you, right? Even if they wouldn't recommend it for you, they're talking about these therapies and you may say, hey, I still want to try it, right? Let's go for it.
Yeah.
So I think, again, it's that very honest conversation between the provider and the patient, because you're right, a lot of patients do want to be involved in the next big thing. And, we'll be willing to do a lot to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't necessarily want to live to 125, but we would like to have a better quality of life in retirement or see our grandkids or great grandkids. All right, final couple of questions. Your last book, what's in your Audible library right now that you would recommend to a doctor or to your friends? Could be sometimes it's a pleasure reading thing, and you're like, that was the best book. I think the weirdest book I got was about archaeological dentistry. And I was like,
Oh,
wow, that's such a weird book. So, nonetheless,
no,
what would you recommend or give
I
away
would
most?
say, like, if it was more of like a pleasure read, I read a lot of fantasy books, and the one that I would recommend by far is called Name of the Wind. It was the first fantasy book I've ever read. I had someone give it to me, and I was like, heck no, I'm not reading this. Like, I do not like those books. I like the cheesy romantic books or some weird mystery books. I read this book and it was the absolute best. And everyone I recommend it to, it becomes their favorite book. So, Name of the Wind,
Wow.
Patrick Rothfuss. There's two. It's been taking him 10 plus years to write the third, but I think he's still going to write it. So that
Hmm.
would be my little like pleasure read. From a more scientific standpoint, though, I would read, I think one of the best books out there on epigenetics is called TruAge, not affiliated with us, but it's called TruAge, Cutting Edge Research to Help Turn Back the Clock. And that's by Dr. Morgan Levine, PhD, who was at UCLA and then went to Yale, is now at Altos Lab studying epigenetic reprogramming. And I think she's one of, if not the absolute best researchers in the area of epigenetics.
Wow. We'll put the links to those as well so you can learn more about those books. I think that that's fantastic. Every year we put out twice a year, we put out a physician reading list or like a peer recommended reading list. We add these different titles to the reading list. And I would say more often than not, when you look at the list of, for example, we put one out at Christmas time, 50 different books. I would say 80% of those books were about self-help, business, and pleasure.
Wow.
Like just pleasure reading the fantasy. Do you remember those books? I don't know if they still create those where like you read the first 10 pages and then you have to like skip to like page 72 and then you read another 4 pages and then you have to go back. You remember those types of books in
I don't
school?
know that I've ever read that any like that, but there's a series called Actar, A Court of Thorn and Roses. I don't know if you've heard of it before. Where you can nope, that's not the one. Same writer, but it's her other series. I forget what it's
Hmm.
called. Assassin's Blade, I think is what it's called. It's like 7 or 8 books, but
Hmm.
it's the Assassin's Blade series, and basically you can tandem read 2 books. Like there's a way you can read them, and I actually did that because it's kind of like a separated path with some of the characters. So I would read like 2 chapters over here, then 3 chapters, then one, and it was like, whoa! It was like this whole different journey. So it was really cool to do that.
I love that. That's
Yeah,
really neat. I mean, you got to get creative because books are books can be boring. I
yeah.
mean, I know because I've written plenty of them. All right. Our final question for you is a bit of a two-parter. if you were to hang up your spurs and you're like, I could hand over the keys to the true diagnostic thing to the next, like that was it. That's why we started this. That's why we did this. Which also correlates to what do you want to be known for?
Mm. I just want to be known for being genuine and authentic. Nothing that has to do with business or some big discovery or anything. I would just want to be known as, yeah, being like pure to people in my real true self.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, if you were to think of a story that you're like, that was it. That's you're sitting on a rocking chair one day, on a front porch somewhere, and you're like talking to the other person who has hopefully not Alzheimer's and you don't have Alzheimer's, but somehow you're like, hey, for some reason, Bob, I got this story that popped into my mind. Let me tell you about this amazing story.
Oh, I don't know that one pops into mind. Like, I don't know that I've reached that point yet. I hope I have many more stories. I have a bunch of great ones. I hope I have many, many more to come. Alzheimer's runs in my family too, so I hope that's, not me in the rocking chair with Alzheimer's. But if I had to choose again, I think I'd just come back to like you're gonna remember the connections you make with people along the way. You're gonna remember how certain people had effects on, a certain effect on your life. I don't necessarily, I'll remember the success, that we've had with TruDiagnostic and my professional career, but I don't know that I'll be sitting on my rocking chair thinking about that. I think I'll be thinking about the people along the way and who I actually did it with. So I
Yeah.
think that's what life
Wow.
is all about.
That that is absolutely what it's all about. I can tell you that some of the best friendships I've made are in this
Mhm.
particular, space in healthcare. It just happens to be concierge medicine. And it's like, these are some of the best. And I know that there's other physicians and other providers and other people like yourself who are just some of the salt of the earth. Like they're the best people in the world. And you're like, where have you guys been? Like, why aren't we all more popular? Why aren't you guys are helping so many more people? But again,
Yeah.
it's all about making a difference where you are. And I don't like the cliche of, from the quote of Steve Jobs, like make a dent in the universe. But, I think that there's so much truth to that as like I tell my kids, like, hey, you know, and not to set your expectations low, but make a dent. Like that's what we're trying to do. We're just a little bit better. And I reference one last story that was given to me by my mentor, and he said, my daughter was given a particular topic in speech class. And that topic was, I think, ovens, and it was super boring, right? And it was like, how am I going to make ovens or, you know, epigenetics? Let's say you were given epigenetics as a talk, and you're like, how am I going to make that interesting to a group of people who's a little bit resistant, but a little bit open to it? And, the whole thing at the end of the day, she started and she's like, close your eyes. And
Mhm.
then it had the whole audience close their eyes. And then she walked around the classroom and put a chocolate chip cookie on everybody's, with a napkin on everybody's desk, right? All these students' desks. And she went back to the front and she's like, now open your eyes. I want to tell you about what made that chocolate chip cookie, and it's called an oven. And I love that story because I think that we can make healthcare, anything in healthcare, interesting as long as
Yeah.
we have the time, right? We have
Yeah.
the
That's cool.
personality for it. So,
No, I like
um,
that story a lot. And yeah, the last thing I'll say too, we have an amazing culture at True Diagnostic as well. We really embrace all of our values, which include, playfulness being one of them, awareness, relentless curiosity, and the pursuit of truth. So all of those I think we really embody. And, yeah, I genuinely really, really love everyone who works at True Diagnostic. So it's an amazing group.
that is important. So important who we spend our time with, and we wrench on healthcare to make it just a little bit better. So the co-founder Hannah Went has been our guest today. She's the co-founder of TruDiagnostic. You can go to TruDiagnostic.com to learn how to partner with them, and we'll put the links in the show notes as well as some of the studies that or the publications. So that you can learn more and just get yourself more familiar and educated. And when patients come and ask for this stuff, that you're informed. So thank you, Hannah, for being our guest today.
Awesome. Thank you so much.